The house had grown quiet after dinner, but Emily could still feel the storm inside her chest. She moved through the motions of cleaning up the scrape of dishes, the rush of water in the sink, the clink of silverware, but none of it silenced the thoughts swirling in her mind. Daniel's unfinished words lingered like smoke in the air. She didn't need him to finish the sentence. She had heard enough. She knew what was in his heart because she felt it too, though she wished desperately that she didn't. When the last dish was set in the rack, Emily turned off the light and climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. Her room, usually a haven, felt suffocating that night. She lay down on her bed, staring up at the ceiling, her mind racing. Sleep didn't come. Instead, memories of the past pressed in. She remembered the day David had died, the hospital room, the sterile smell, the sound of the monitor going flat. She remembered holding Daniel close, whispering promises that she would always be there for him, that she would protect him no matter what. He had only been 11 then, small and fragile, clinging to her as though she was his only anchor in the world. And for years, she had been Dot. It had always been just the two of them. They had eaten together, celebrated Christmas with only their little tree, laughed at old movies, leaned on each other in ways most families with two parents never needed to. She had never remarried, never even truly considered it. Daniel had been enough. Her whole world. But now he wasn't just her little boy anymore. He was grown, a man with his father's face and his own quiet strength. And the closeness they shared had shifted into something she didn't know how to name. Dot in the stillness of the night. Emily heard footsteps outside her door. She held her breath, her heart thundering. There was a pause, then a soft creak of the floorboards, as though Daniel was standing there, hesitating. For a long moment, the silence stretched between them, the door a fragile barrier. She closed her eyes, half afraid, half wishing he would knock, half terrified of what she might do if he did. But no knock came. After a moment, the footsteps moved away, fading into the quiet of the house. Emily let out a shaky breath. Tears slipped down her cheeks, hot and unbidden. She pressed a pillow against her face to stifle the sound of her sobs. The ache in her chest was unbearably a tangle of love, grief, longing, and guilt. She loved him. She had always loved him. But love wasn't supposed to feel this complicated. The night dragged on. Shadows shifted across the walls. The clock ticked steadily on her nightstand, and still Emily lay awake, torn between two truths: the unbreakable bond of a mother's love and the dangerous new shape that bond was beginning to take. Dot, when morning finally came. The light was pale and gray through the curtains. Emily rose, her body heavy with exhaustion. She moved through the kitchen quietly, making coffee more for something to do than for the taste. The smell filled the air, familiar and grounding, though nothing inside her felt steady anymore. Daniel came downstairs not long after. He looked tired too, his hair slightly mussed, his shirt wrinkled. He avoided her eyes at first, moving toward his bag. Gathering his things, Emily busied herself with the coffee pot, her hands trembling slightly as she poured a cup. She wanted to speak, to smooth over the jagged edges of last night. But the words wouldn't come. "I'll grab breakfast out," Daniel muttered. His voice low. Emily nodded, though her chest tightened. She wanted to stop him, to tell him to sit, to remind him that no matter what, she was still his mother. But she also feared what might spill out if she opened her mouth. Daniel slung his bag over his shoulder and moved toward the door. For a moment, Emily thought he would leave without another word, and the thought broke her heart. But then he paused, turning back to her. His eyes finally met hers. They were soft, filled with something fragile and raw. "You'll always be the most important person in my life." He said quietly. "Always." Emily's throat tightened. She forced a smile, though tears blurred her vision. "And you'll always be mine." For one fleeting moment, their eyes held. So much passed between them in that look: love, gratitude, longing, heartbreak, and the weight of all the things they couldn't say aloud. Then Daniel turned and walked out the door, leaving the house wrapped in silence once more. Emily stood frozen in the kitchen, her hands gripping the counter. The ache inside her was almost unbearable, yet threaded with something else too. Hope, because even though they hadn't spoken the words, even though they both knew they couldn't, she felt it's that invisible thread that tied them together. Stronger than anything else in the world, it was. Love, complicated, messy, forbidden, but love all the same. And as she stood there, watching the morning light spill across the empty table, Emily knew one thing with certainty. Their story wasn't finished. Not yet. She turned, startled. Yes. He hesitated, his fork halfway to his lips. His eyes softened, almost vulnerable. Thank you. For everything. I don't know what I'd do without you. The sincerity in his tone nearly undid her. She forced her smile, nodding quickly. That's what mothers are for. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't enough. He wasn't just thanking her for breakfast or the tie or the little things. His words carried something deeper, heavier. Something she wasn't ready to face. The silence returned after that, thick and uneasy. Emily could feel her heartbeat in her ears, the air between them fragile as glass. She tried to pretend it was just another morning, just a sun getting ready for an important day. But deep down, she knew better. Something had shifted, and she didn't know how long they could keep pretending it hadn't. The day passed in fragments. At least for Emily. After Daniel left for his interview, the house felt strangely empty. She tried to occupy herself with chores, folding laundry, wiping the counters, watering the plants by the window. But her thoughts drifted back again and again to that moment in the kitchen, the tie in her hands, the warmth of his chest beneath her fingertips, and that look in his eyes. She pressed her palms against the sink, scolding herself silently. He's your son, Emily. Don't be foolish. Still, she couldn't deny how unsettled she felt. It wasn't that she loved him less, she had always loved him more than life itself. But somewhere in the quiet spaces of their lives together, in the years after David's death, the bond between them had deepened in ways she hadn't noticed until now. They had leaned on each other. They had filled the silence of an empty house. They had been each other's only constant. And sometimes that closeness felt like too much. By the time Daniel returned home in the evening, Emily had convinced herself it was all in her imagination. She told herself she would smile, ask about his interview, serve dinner, and everything would fall back into place. When she heard the door open, she hurried into the living room. Daniel stepped in, shoulders relaxed, a small smile tugging at his lips. How did it go? She asked quickly, almost too eagerly. I think it went well, he replied, setting his jacket on the back of a chair. They asked a lot of questions, but I think I held my own. His smile reassured her, but only for a moment. Because when his eyes met hers, there it was. Again that same look from the morning. Warm, searching, too deep. Emily's heart skipped. She turned away, busying herself with the table. That's wonderful, she said lightly. You deserve it. They sat down to dinner, just the two of them, as they always had. Emily placed roasted chicken and vegetables on the plates, poured him a glass of water, and forced herself into the comfort of routine. She thought if she pretended hard enough, things would feel normal again. But normal didn't come. As Daniel reached for his glass, his fingers brushed hers. It was the briefest touch, but it sent a shiver up her arm. She meant to pull back instantly, but she didn't, not right away. And when she finally did, she realized Daniel hadn't moved either. Their eyes met, and for a breathless second, neither of them looked away. Emily's stomach tightened. She reached for her fork, her hand trembling. She could feel his gaze lingering, heavy with something unspoken. The silence between them stretched, no longer comforting but charged, filled with an energy she didn't dare name. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. His voice was quiet, almost fragile. Mom, I know this sounds strange, but sometimes it feels like it's just you and me in this world. Like we're more than. Emily froze. Her heart stopped mid-beat. The words hung in the air, unfinished but dangerous. She knew what he was about to say, and the realization terrified her. Stop, she whispered quickly, her voice breaking. Don't. Daniel's jaw tightened. His shoulders stiffened as he looked away. his fork clattering softly against the plate. "I didn't mean," he began, but his voice faltered. Emily pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady herself. She couldn't let him finish. She couldn't let him say what both of them already knew lingered beneath the surface. The truth was too raw, too complicated, too forbidden. The silence that followed was unbearable. Emily picked at her food, though she couldn't eat. Daniel barely touched his plate at all. The ticking of the old kitchen clock filled the room, louder than ever, as though it was keeping count of their unspoken words. She wanted to reach across the table, to take his hand and reassure him, to tell him everything would be okay. But she didn't know what okay meant anymore. Could they ever go back to the easy closeness they had shared before? Or had this moment, this crack in the silence, changed everything forever? Daniel finally pushed back his chair, the sound scraping against the floor. "I'm not hungry," he muttered, his voice tight. Emily began, but he was already standing, his tall frame casting a shadow across the room. He paused for a second, his back to her, as though he wanted to say something more. But instead, he shook his head and walked out, leaving her sitting at the table, staring at two untouched plates and a silence that felt heavier than words. Emily pressed her hands together, her chest aching. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She didn't want to cry. She had cried enough over the years over David, over loneliness, over the burden of being both mother and father to her son. But tonight her tears came from a different place. Fear. Fear of what she had seen in Daniel's eyes. Fear of what she had felt in her own heart. She whispered to the empty kitchen, as though speaking aloud might undo the truth. "He's my son. My son." But the words didn't ease her. They only reminded her of how fragile the line between them had become. Upstairs, she could hear the faint creak of floorboards as Daniel moved about in his room. The sound was familiar, comforting in its own way. Yet tonight, it felt different. The walls between them suddenly seemed too thin. The house too small for the silence they carried. Emily knew with a sinking heart that nothing would ever be the same again. That evening had drawn a line they could not uncross. The morning began the way most mornings did in the Carter household, quiet, steady, and filled with the scent of fresh coffee drifting through the kitchen. Emily Carter moved about with practiced ease, frying eggs on the stove while slices of toast warmed in the oven. The sun had just begun its climb, spilling golden light through the lace curtains, painting her small kitchen in a warm glow. She liked mornings like this, simple, predictable, and safe. Yet that day was not quite ordinary. There was an energy in the air, something unspoken because her son, Daniel, had an important day ahead. At 21, Daniel was stepping into adulthood in ways that made Emily's chest tighten with both pride and nostalgia. He had graduated college only months ago, and today was his first big interview for a position at a local firm in town. She had watched him prepare carefully over the past few days, ironing his shirt, polishing his shoes, and rehearsing answers under his breath. But still, as he entered the kitchen that morning, she saw something in his hands that made her pause. It was a tie. He held it awkwardly, the long strip of silk dangling between his fingers like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. His dark hair was combed neatly, his jacket pressed, but there was a nervous tilt to his shoulders. "Mom," he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant, "could you help me with this?" The simple request caught Emily off guard. She turned from the stove, spatula still in hand, and for a second time seemed to fold back on itself. She was no longer just looking at her son. She was seeing echoes of her husband, David. Her late husband had often stood in that very kitchen, fumbling with his ties, calling out with a sheepish grin, "Can you fix this for me? I swear I'll never figure it out." She had always laughed, stepping close to loop the fabric neatly around his collar. It had been such a small thing then, barely worth a thought. And yet now, years later, it was one of the memories she held on to most dearly. Her heart clenched at the sight of Daniel holding the tie. He looked so much like his father at that moment. The same steady eyes, the same nervous half-smile that for a moment she couldn't move. Daniel shifted, breaking the silence. I tried, but it just looks like a knot of spaghetti. Emily set the spatula down, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She smiled, though her chest was tight. Let me see. He stepped closer, and she took the tie gently from his hands. The fabric was smooth beneath her fingers, the color a deep navy blue, chosen carefully to match his suit. She lifted it and motioned for him to stand still, as she looped the tie around his collar. She realized something she hadn't before. He wasn't her little boy anymore. Daniel had grown taller than she was by several inches. His shoulders were broad, his frame strong. She had raised him, watched him stumble through scraped knees, heartbreaks, and late-night studying sessions. But now, standing so close, she saw the man he had become. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, and she hoped he wouldn't notice. Relax. Mom, Daniel said softly, trying to ease her nerves. It's just a tie. But to Emily, it wasn't just a tie. It was a reminder of all the mornings she had tied one for David, of the years that had slipped by, of the fragile line between past and present. She forced herself to focus on the knot, folding the fabric with precision, but her eyes betrayed her. When she looked up, she found Daniel watching her intently. His gaze was steady, almost searching. There was no impatience in it, no teasing. Instead, it was filled with something unspoken. Something that made her heart stumble in her chest. She looked away quickly, concentrating on the final loop. There, she murmured, tightening the knot. Nice and neat. Her fingers brushed against his chest as she adjusted the tie. She felt the warmth of his body through the fabric of his shirt, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For a brief moment, the air between them thickened, charged with something neither of them could name. Daniel didn't step back immediately. He stood still, his eyes on her, his jaw tight as if holding back words he wasn't sure he should say. Emily cleared her throat and forced a smile. You look handsome. Very professional. They'll be lucky to have you. Finally, he smiled, a flash of boyish charm that reminded her of the child he used to be. Thanks, Mom. Couldn't have done it without you. She let out a small laugh, but inside her heart was racing. She had tied his tie just as she had tied his father's all those years ago, and yet the moment felt heavier than it should. Something had shifted between them, subtle but undeniable. As Daniel turned to grab his briefcase, Emily lingered, watching him. Pride swelled in her chest. He was her son, her miracle. The reason she had kept going after losing David, but along with pride came something else. Something dangerous, the realization that he was no longer just the little boy she had raised. He was a man now, standing tall before her. And for the first time, she didn't know how to handle the closeness. She pressed her lips together, steadying herself. This was just a morning, just a tie, just a mother helping her son. And yet, deep down, she already knew this was the beginning of something she couldn't quite name. A soft silence lingered in the kitchen as Daniel straightened his jacket. He gave her one last look before heading toward the door. His smile warm, but his eyes carrying something heavier, something almost questioning. Emily turned back to the stove, her hands busy but her mind far away. She knew life had changed in small, invisible ways. She could feel it in her chest, in the echo of his gaze, in the trembling of her own hands, and though she tried to push it aside, she couldn't shake the thought. Perhaps that morning, with a simple tie in her hands, everything had quietly begun to shift. The tie was done. The knot was neat, centered perfectly against Daniel's collar. Emily had stepped back with a smile, trying to make the moment light, but her heart was still racing. The kitchen, usually filled with the casual clatter of morning, had fallen strangely quiet. It was in that silence where everything changed. Emily's fingers tingled. From where they had brushed against Daniel's chest, the warmth of him lingering on her skin, she scolded herself for noticing, for letting something so ordinary feel so heavy. He was her son, her baby. And yet, he was also a man now standing before her with shoulders broad and steady. His eyes deep with thought, Daniel adjusted the knot slightly, then let his hands fall to his sides. He didn't move away. Instead, he just looked at her, really looked in a way that made her throat tighten. It wasn't the look of a child waiting for approval, it was something older, searching, complicated. "You're good at this," he said finally, his voice low. "Dad must have liked when you did it for him." Emily froze. The name hit her like a wave. David, her husband. Daniel's father. Gone for nearly 10 years now, but alive in the memories that surfaced so easily with moments like this. She forced her lips into a soft smile, though her chest ached. "Yes," she whispered. "He used to tease me about it. Said I made the knots too perfect." Daniel's mouth curved into a faint smile, but his eyes were sad. "I wish I had known him better. Sometimes I feel like I only see him through you." The words struck something deep inside her. It was true. Daniel had been just a boy when David passed, barely old enough to understand. Over the years, she had carried the memories, kept them alive in stories and small habits. And now, standing this close, she realized Daniel wasn't just looking at her as his mother, he was searching for his father in her, for a connection to the man he never really got to grow up with. Her chest tightened with longing, with grief she thought she had buried. She wanted to say something comforting, something wise, but the words stuck. Instead, she swallowed hard and adjusted the tie one last time, her hands trembling against the fabric. "There," she said too quickly. "All done." She stepped back, creating space between them, as if distance could calm the storm inside her. But Daniel didn't immediately step away. He stood rooted, his eyes still fixed on her, filled with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence, each second stretching out. Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks. She turned her back to him, reaching for the coffee pot just to give her hands something to do. "Breakfast is ready," she said, her voice a little sharper than she intended. "You should eat before you go." But she could feel his gaze on her even as she poured the coffee. It wasn't the gaze of a boy anymore, it was the gaze of a man. One who had leaned on her, one who had grown with her, one who suddenly seemed too close, too aware. When she finally turned, he was still watching her. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between tender and unsettled. She forced a smile, setting a plate in front of him. "Eat, you'll need your energy." Daniel sat down, but the silence didn't lift. He picked at his food, glancing up at her between bites, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't quite find the words. Emily busied herself with dishes, though her hands shook as she scrubbed. Her mind was a storm of thoughts she didn't dare name. She had always been strong, had always put Daniel first, had always told herself that her love was meant to be steady, protective, safe. But the way he had looked at her just moments ago didn't feel like a son looking at his mother. It felt like something else. The realization made her breath catch, and she gripped the counter for balance. She didn't want to think it, didn't want to feel it, but the truth was already there, lingering in the silence between them. Daniel's voice broke through. "Mom,